Hi, Mystery Nox listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Kim.
And I'm Mary.
And for today's case, we're stepping back into 1959, deep into the Siberian wilderness. A group of hikers attempts a hiking expedition in the dead of winter, but things take a horrible turn. To this day, no one really knows what happened to them. This is the case of the Dyatlov Pass. This episode contains graphic depictions of trauma. Listener discretion is advised. So, Mary, are you ready for this whopper of a case?
Dude, this case.
This is crazy.
What I liked about this, it starts like, oh, this is what happens. Mm-hmm. But then you look more into this shit, and it's like, poof.
And it's so much more.
No, it really is.
It really is.
I didn't think it would expand to this much information that we found.
Yeah, I didn't either. And it was
I thought it would be open and close, like, they get lost. It's more than that. It's crazy.
But yeah, this is definitely a whopper.
I want a whopper.
Did that make you want a whopper?
Yes. You did that earlier, too.
I know. I was just wondering if you still wanted
You
a
were
whopper.
just talking about the case, and then all of a sudden, this story was a whopper.
Definitely a whopper.
Then I'm like, whopper.
Sounds good.
They can keep the buns, but the whopper.
Oh, I know.
Part.
All I have is coffee. What do you have?
Yeah, coffee and that little concoction of fries, chili, cheese. Mm-hmm. What else was there? Jalapenos. What else was there? Hold on, I already forget. More cheese with ghost pepper.
More cheese. Yeah, that sounds good.
It's good.
Sounds good. I'll have to try it next time. All right, well, let's get into this. Are you ready?
Our case begins on January 23, 1959, where a group of students from Ural Polytechnical Institute and a ski instructor had planned to embark on a 16-day expedition through the Ural Mountains, where their final destination was Mount Oratortin. The hiking expedition was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, in which the pass was later named after. Dyatlov was an experienced hiker, passionate about the outdoors, an avid skier, and a student at Ural Polytechnical Institute that majored in radio engineering. The other members of the expedition included Yuri Krivonishenko, who was 23 years old and a close friend and hiking companion to Igor. He was also a construction and hydraulics student. Yuri Doroshenko, who was 21 years old, a radio engineering student, and came off as impulsive and fearless, and once confronted a bear with a geologist hammer. Yuri Yudin, who was 21 years old, and an economics student with an interest in geology. Zenita Kolmogrova, who was 22 years old and a radio engineering student. Lyuda Dumania, who was 20 years old and an engineering and economics student. She loved photography and often took pictures. Alexander Kolefatov, who is also known as Sasha, 24 years old, a physics student and interested in nuclear physics. Rustem Slobodin, who is 23 years old and a mechanical engineer student. Nikolai Timobrigno, who was 23 years old and a civil engineering graduate. And the last one is Semyon Zolotaryov, who was 38 years old, a ski instructor and World War II vet, who joined to earn his certification for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking. None of the students knew this man. Here's one of the entries from Lyuda's journal regarding Semyon. At first nobody wanted this Zolotaryov, for he is a stranger. But then we all agreed, because you can't refuse. Thus, as we were 10, we remained 10. Each member was experienced hikers with ski tour experience and had planned on getting their hiking certification, grade 3, the highest level in the USSR, upon completing the trip, which sadly did not happen.
So does that mean they were grade 2? And what were all the grades?
They were grade 2 certified. I couldn't find an exact description of what each level 1, 2, and 3 entailed, but from what I gathered, it was all on experience. How long of a hike or expedition, miles to days, in the weather in which they traveled in, and terrain. I'm sure knowledge and equipment and safety would have been a part of that as well. The group departed on January 23rd from Sverdlovsk, which is now known as Yekaterinburg, where they traveled by train to Ivdel and arrived on the 25th of January at midnight. The next morning they traveled by bus from Ivdel to Vishai, where they gathered supplies and equipment and prepped for their expedition. Prior to their leave, Dyatlov went to the post office to send a telegram that they had arrived at their checkpoint and would send another telegram on February 12th, once they completed their journey. Dyatlov also checked into Sverdlovsk's political bureau of extreme sports and sent a postcard to his father, which was the last message he'd write. From Vishai, they traveled to Settlement 41, a remote woodcutting settlement. Here's a journal entry by Krivonashenko about Settlement 41. In Settlement 41, we were greeted warmly. They gave us a separate room in a hostel. We talked a lot with the local workers. I remembered particularly the red-bearded man. The beard, that's what his friends called him. The next day, on January 27th, they traveled to an abandoned geological site, Nord 2, where it's known to be the last human settlement in the area. According to a journal entry written by Doroshenko, a deal was made with the local where they hired a man by the name of Uncle Slava. They utilized his horse and sled to carry their supplies. While there, it was noted that Yudin wasn't feeling well due to joint pain, but occupied his time in collecting geological samples from the area for the university. Here's an excerpt from Yudin's journal. We spent the night in the hut of the second northern settlement. There's so much, many houses, warehouses, premises, old vehicles, machine tools. Everything was abandoned since 1952. Here worked geological expedition what they could took out, the rest was exhausted and thrown. The houses are all destroyed, there is only one with a stove and glass on the windows. The place is picturesque. Lozva River is wide. Lots of lime rocks. Uncle Slava says that in the summer you can cross the river. Many warm hot springs. Sagebrush is not entirely frozen, and there are places under the snow where water is not frozen, after which we need to break the ice from the skis. The next day, on January 28th, with Yudin still not feeling any better, his sciatic nerves getting worse, opted to not join them on their expedition, and the 9 continued by foot and skis, following the Ospia River into the mountains. The decision to turn back was a hard one for Yudin, as they were on the last leg of the trip, but it was a decision everyone respected. Not wasting any of the materials, they distributed his load into all of their packs. Here's an excerpt from Lyuda's journal regarding Yuri's departure. Yuri Yudin goes back home today. It's a pity, of course, that he leaves us, especially for me and Zina, but nothing can be done about it. The decision to turn back saved Yudin's life. He lived to the age of 75 and died on April 27, 2013. By January 29th, they were traveling along the Ospia River to hike to the mountain, and by the 30th there was journal notes describing the weather, how it was getting colder, and temperatures between -11 to -24 degrees Celsius, the wind stronger, and often creating the effect of it snowing. Igor commented in his journal notes saying, "We can't see the trail and sometimes we have to grope our way through. All we can do is 1.52 kilometers, or 1 mile, per hour. We are forced to find new methods of clearing the path for the skis. The first member leaves his backpack on the ground and walks forward, then returns and rests for 10 to 15 minutes with the group. This way we are continuously laying ski tracks. It is especially hard for the second to move along the new trail with full gear on the back." To lighten the load, they cached surplus food and equipment that would be used on the return trip, then hiked to the base of Kalatsiako Mountain, which translates to the Dead Mountain, in Monsi. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, the mountain got its name simply because there was no game to hunt for the Monsi hunters.
So what do you mean they cached their food and equipment? What does that mean?
What that means is that they built a structure to hold supplies that they wouldn't need until they were heading back. They left food, equipment, the infamous mandolin, clothing, Igor's shoes, for example. Due to a bad snowstorm and poor visibility, they went slightly off course, heading west. Realizing their mistake on February 2nd, they pitched their tents on the north slope of the mountain for the night in hopes to get back on track in the morning. But that would not happen.
Why would they do that? That's not a good place to camp, according to other experts.
According to some reports, the way they set up their tent was set up in an amateurish way, unusual for experienced hikers, although not indefensible. I'm thinking it was too late to turn around and find another spot, or just maybe they were too tired that they had to make do with the current location. They were already off course, may as well stay put, as to not get further away from their intended goal, even though they were a mile from the tree line. In an article in the St. Petersburg Times, Yudin was quoted in saying, "Dyatlov probably did not want to lose distance they had covered, or he decided to practice camping on the mountain slope." By February 12th, no one had heard from them, but no one seemed too concerned as the hike itself was difficult and times were approximate. However, by February 20th, the families were persistent in sending out a search for them. It was then that a volunteer group made up of students and faculty from the university set out in search for them. Not long after, the Army and Soviet police force joined. February 26th, 14 days after the hikers should have returned from Vichy, the campsite was found, damaged and abandoned. There was a cut on the tent that was made from the inside. Another odd observation was that the hikers' belongings were still there, including their shoes and clothing. Footprints were found at the campsite. Quote, 8 or 9 sets of footprints were found. Footprints that looked to be barefoot or footprints appearing to be wearing socks or one shoe were still visible in the snow. End quote. But the strange thing was, there wasn't any outside the tent, but a few meters away. But here's a quote that supports the lack of footprints. Quote, "There were no footprints right around the tent, because when the Dyatlov group dug, they had stacked snow all around, and later this snow was drifted by the wind, thus covering all the tracks. But 30 or 40 meters down, there was a file of very well-preserved footprints." End quote. The search party followed the footprints northeast for about a mile down a slope from the campsite to a nearby wooded area, where they found remnants of a fire and death. After the break, we dive into the strange injuries found on the hikers, and the many theories regarding this case.
Now back to the case. On February 27, 1959, the first 2 bodies of the hikers were found. The bodies were about 2 to 3 meters, almost 10 feet, from the remains of a fire. They were the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. The following information is taken from the coroner's report regarding the bodies of the hikers, and again, it is graphic. Listener discretion is advised. The 2 men both had multiple bumps and bruises on different body parts, but I'm only going to highlight the most severe. First is Doroshenko. Doroshenko was found lying face down, right next to Krivonischenko. His ear, nose, and lips were covered with blood. His hair was burned on the right side of his head and foot, and he had gray liquid coming from his open mouth. I'm going to include what he was wearing because I found it interesting considering the weather conditions they were in, which consisted of heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Quote, "He was wearing sleeveless cotton undershirt, short-sleeved checkered t-shirt with 2 empty breast pockets, with all 6 buttons fastened, shorts and swimming trunks. Blue cotton underpants fastened with 2 buttons, badly ripped on the front right side with 1 large hole, 23 centimeters in length, inside the thigh of the left side, 13 centimeters in length. He was wearing different set of wool socks on both feet. Socks on left foot were burned. No shoes." End quote. Also, according to the autopsy report, it seems that Doroshenko's body was moved after he was deceased, which raises even more questions if we go by the coroner's report of hypothermia. Krivonischenko's body was found right next to Doroshenko, but was found face up under a cedar tree. The skin was bitten off one of his knuckles on his right hand and was found in his mouth. He had burns on his left leg and foot. He was also found not wearing any shoes. Igor Dyatlov's body was found the same day. He was found face up as well, 300 meters, about 1/5 of a mile, from the cedar tree. He also had blood on his lips and was also found with no shoes. Now, something odd about the way his body was found is his jacket was unbuttoned and his arms were raised above his chest, folded with his fists clenched. He also had a watch on his wrist with the time stopped at 5:31.
Did they say anything about why the watch stopped at the time? Was it like the cold, battery, or any sort of impact?
So there are 3 reasons a manual wind-up watch would stop in these conditions. 1, if it was fully unwound. 2, if the lubricant freezes. 3, if the condensation freezes. Or 4, if the watch is placed on a frozen surface with good contact, like ice, then one part of the watch will promptly freeze and the mechanism might stop working due to large difference in temperatures among the parts. Igor's body was also described as, quote, bluish red, end quote. During his funeral, his sister is quoted as saying, "It was just terrible. He looked completely different to what he looked like before. My mom said that she only recognized him from the gap between his teeth. His hair was gray." 𝒂𝒊𝒔𝒉𝒆𝒅 was found next, about 650 meters, almost half a mile, from the cedar tree. She was found face down and dressed well, but again, no shoes. Her complexion was also described as, quote, purple-red in color, end quote, and her head was towards the tent. Zanita's official cause of death was also hypothermia, but, quote, due to a violent accident, end quote. Just as a side note, the coroner did not go into details of what that accident possibly could have been, so I thought that was weird. She had a big red bruise on the right side of her abdomen, which the coroner implied it looked like the bruise was left from a baton. No sign of sexual assault. The reason why this was looked for will come into play later on, when we talk about the theories. Rustem Slobodin's body was found on March 5th, face down and dressed well.
When you say dressed well, what exactly does that entail? What were they wearing, if you know?
Yeah, so when I say that they were dressed well, all I mean is that they were dressed correctly for the weather conditions.
Okay.
Because Doroshenko was not dressed for the weather.
Yeah, so you just mean like in terms of layers and weather gear, that sort of thing?
Yeah, like they had on shirts, jackets, hats, pants, and socks. The body had traces of blood discharge from his nose, swollen lips, and some skin was torn from his right forearm. There was also a fracture to his skull, which the coroner stated, quote, could be done with some blunt object, end quote. It is noted that Rustem most likely lost coordination right after the blow. He had one boot on his right foot. His body was 450 meters from the cedar tree. The watch found on his body had stopped at 8:45. His body was also facing towards the tent. 2 months went by without finding the other 4 hikers. When the snow began melting in May, the bodies of the remaining 4 hikers were found by a Mansi native, which is a local indigenous people in the area. The bodies were found in a deep ravine, a few feet from a den that the hikers must have built for shelter. The den was around 75 meters from the cedar tree.
What shelter? Did they build another one? Or, how did they have time to?
Yeah, so this was odd because obviously they already had a tent. So my question was, why didn't they return to their tent? And also, same question, they had all this time to make a shelter. So what the shelter was is they basically made the shelter in a ravine that they were in, and they cut branches off of trees and laid down like a little floor of sticks so that their bodies wouldn't be touching the snow and the ice, so they could preserve their heat, their body heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not get wet.
Yeah, and not get wet. They also used sticks to kind of try to make like walls, but I don't think it wasn't very well built, let's just put it that way. So yeah, that was the den that they found in the ravine. So another odd fact about the den is they used Krivonischenko's knife to cut off branches from the trees. However, when the investigators found the den and the bodies, the knife was never found. They only found the knife sheath.
That's sketchy. Maybe it might have dropped into the river?
Possibly. And
unless, because I don't want to automatically assume someone had taken it, like one of the investigators or people who found them. But that could be another thing too.
Yeah, I thought of that too. Like maybe it just wasn't found, because there are places it could have dropped and not been found. But the thing that's weird about that is there has been other evidence that was found at the scene and then was lost.
Yeah, I was reading that as well.
Yeah, so, I don't know, it just makes you wonder. So the first body that was found after the 2 months had passed was the body of Lyuda Dumanina. They found her body laying on a ledge with water rolling over it. Her body was in a kneeling position, and it looked like she was hugging the rock, with her chest and face against the rock. Her mouth was open, like she was screaming. She was dressed well for the weather, but also had no shoes on. According to witnesses that found her body and the coroner's report, her eyes were missing and her tongue was gone. She also had multiple broken ribs. Also, as if that wasn't disturbing enough, here's an even more disturbing find. Her stomach contents contained evidence that could indicate her tongue might have been removed while she was still alive. No signs of sexual assault were found, as was also checked with Zenaida. Her cause of death is listed as, quote, hemorrhage into the right atrium of the heart, multiple fractured ribs, and internal bleeding, end quote.
What would cause injuries like that?
Well, here's an excerpt from a forensic expert back in 1959, being asked about this. He states, quote, both Simeon and Lyuda had hemorrhaging into the cardiac muscle with hemorrhaging into the pleural cavity, which is evidence of them being alive when injured, and is the result of the action of a large force, similar to the example used for Nikolai. These wounds, especially appearing in such a way without any damage to the soft tissue of the chest, are very similar to the type of trauma that results from the shock wave of a bomb, end quote. The bodies of Simeon Zolotaryov and Alexander Kolefatov were found together. Simeon's eyes were missing, and his body also had broken ribs and an open wound in the right side of his skull. He was very well dressed for the cold. He also had a camera around his neck. Unfortunately, the film was damaged by the water, so no pictures could be developed. According to a passage from 𝑷yatlovpass.com, quote, he was also found holding a pin in one hand and a small notepad in the other. Vladimir Askendazi recalls that Colonel Ortukov grabbed the notepad, looked at it, cursed, and said, he's written nothing. He seems to be the only one that has seen the notepad. The whereabouts of this notepad is unknown. It was never filed in evidence or seen by anyone else, end quote. Which is sketchy to me. More evidence missing.
I just think from them all having journals and whatnot and just writing in even the group one, for them to say that he's written nothing, I think that may be something that was there and they took out.
Yeah, I agree with you. Something they didn't want seen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was like they had written observations. So of course he's going to say, oh, he's written nothing. Of course.
The body of Kolefatov was also well dressed, but was also missing shoes. His body showed signs of a broken nose. He had an open wound behind his ear, and his neck was described as, quote, deformed, end quote. His body was also described as being, quote, a gray-green color with a tinge of purple, end quote.
So when they say deformed, could that mean like his neck was broken, or?
It could, but that's the other thing that's weird about this case is the autopsy report, or the coroner, did not go into a ton of details on some of the deaths. And for a coroner, that's weird.
Yeah, because you would include... I mean, I think you would include everything.
Yeah, you should.
When they don't, yeah, that is kind of suspicious, though. I mean, when they don't, you automatically know they're up to something.
Yeah, I agree. The last body to be found was that of Nikolai T. Mobregno. His body was also dressed very well for the Siberian winter. He did have boots on. His body also had 2 watches on his left arm. One watch was stopped at 8:14 and the other one at 8:39. He had multiple fractures to his temporal bone. In regards to this, the coroner stated, quote, the extensive, depressed, multi-splintered fracture could be the result of an impact of an automobile moving at high speed. This kind of trauma could have occurred if he had been thrown and fallen and hit his head against rocks, ice, etc. by a gust of strong wind, end quote.
So, like, not even falling from a tree or falling down a hill or anything like that?
No, I think the impact for that would not be as great as his injuries showed.
Ah, so basically the speed would have to be faster for impact. Okay.
Correct. A few more facts about the bodies that make this case even stranger. So first of all the bodies had unexplained multiple abrasions or bruising on them. Most of the bodies or their clothes had some sort of burn marks on them.
Burn marks?
Mm-hmm.
Would they know how recent it would be or no? Because wasn't there a fire that happened earlier in the trip?
Yeah, but they did not say.
Okay.
So that I don't know. Also, in regards to Doroshenko having gray liquid coming from his mouth, it is noted from a source that this started a speculation in regards to someone or something pushing on his chest before he died. This forceful method was common for interrogation by the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, and special forces. The cause could also be a nasty fall from a tree.
How high of a tree, though? I mean, why would he be in a tree?
Well, as to how high, I don't know. As to why he's in a tree, we will get into that in the theories. This aspect was ignored in the final papers that read cause of death, hypothermia, end quote. Igor and Rustem had injuries to their metacarpal phalangeal joints, which could signify a fist fight. Some of the hikers' clothing was tested and was found to be highly radioactive. 2 sweaters and a pair of pants. Also, 3 of the bodies looked like they were heading towards the tent. So those were of Igor, Yuri, and Zina. It was suggested that Nikolai and Semyon might have been outside of the tent at the time the mysterious threat struck them, which could be a possible explanation as to why they were the only hikers found with shoes. Both men were much better prepared than the rest of the group when they were forced to abandon their tent. And the last fact was that there was no damage to the soft tissue on 3 of the bodies, which were Lyuda, Semyon, and Alexander Kolefatov. But all 3 of them had internal injuries. And as to what would cause this, a shockwave.
A shockwave from what? Like a bomb?
Mm-hmm. From a bomb. Over the years, there have been so many theories put forth regarding this case. Here are just a few that I think are the most plausible or are the most popular. So the first theory, of course, is hypothermia. When the bodies of the students were found, they had injuries that didn't fit the coroner's conclusion of, quote, death by hypothermia, end quote. So, reasons that some people believe that the death was hypothermia is, of course, because of the coroner's report. Hypothermia is listed as the cause of death for all of the hikers. Some of them do have added things as well, like hypothermia due to an accident or whatever it may be. Also, people think that it could have been hypothermia because some of the clothes on Yuri's body were removed. He was found in it wasn't just his underwear, but he didn't have any pants on, and his shirt was unbuttoned. Actually, a few of the hikers had their shirts unbuttoned, and so there's speculation about that.
I think we should also clarify some of these things when they say that they were found with underwear, just underwear, which they weren't, because when you think underwear, you think literally that. But no, these people had more than just that. They had t-shirts and shorts, and I think a couple of them had like long pants on, but not necessarily pants. I still think it's like, in a sense, like pajamas sort of thing, or what is it, long johns or
long johns. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, in a lot of the research, for some reason, and I don't know why people started saying this, but for some reason, everybody thinks that all the bodies were found in their underwear.
Yeah, like basically naked, and they weren't.
Yeah, which is very untrue. One, because, well, we know this, Mary, because we both saw the photos, the autopsy photos, and the photos of when they were found on the mountain. So, and they were wearing clothes. The only one that was found without pants was Yuri Doroshenko.
And his looked like it was kind of like ripped off. Like he was wearing something.
He was. He did have underwear on, and he did have, I believe it was swimming trunks on top of the underwear. But, which is weird, but no pants.
He was wearing like swim trunks over like pants or something. And I was like, oh, that's one way to stay warm, I guess. But yeah, no, they were all wearing clothes.
Yeah, they were all wearing clothes. Let's just get that out there. All of them were wearing clothes. Let's end that rumor about them, all being in their underwear. Obviously, some were dressed better than others, but they did all have clothes on. Another reason they think hypothermia is some people believe that when Yuri died, Yuri Doroshenko, some of the other hikers removed his clothes so that they could keep warm, which is a possibility, if he did die first from hypothermia. Also, there has been speculation about why Kravchenko's skin was bitten off. So if you remember earlier when I talked about how his body was found, he had bitten skin off of his knuckle, and the skin was found inside of his mouth.
How much skin are we talking?
It wasn't specific, but if you just look at your hand and look at your knuckles, I mean, that's probably what, like a little bit less than a quarter size amount of skin.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was bitten off of his knuckle. Some theories as to why he bit off his skin. One of the theories was either he was trying to stifle a scream, why, we don't know. Or he was trying to, quote, awaken his unresponsive hands by biting himself, end quote. And if that was the case, then he would have been getting hypothermic, so.
I mean, is that something you would do, or something they say to do?
It didn't say, but I mean, they're experienced hikers, right? So if they were in the stages of hypothermia, I guess, but even at that point, it's kind of like your body just takes over, like a survival response, what I mean?
And this is like nowhere near that, but like when your leg falls asleep and you get those little tingly feelings and you kind of just hit it against something. I'm not saying it's like that, but maybe the notion of it, like trying to wake something up.
Could be. But why just bite like your knuckle? Like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. But some people think that maybe he was up in a tree and he was trying to stay in the tree and his hands were getting hypothermic, and so they were getting unresponsive because of the hypothermia, so he was trying to bite his knuckles to get his hands to respond. That was one of the theories. So just let's say it was hypothermia, okay? This theory still does not explain, one, all the rest of the injuries to the bodies, which we went over, nor why the group rushed out of the safety of their tent, nor the radiation that some of the bodies had and some of the clothes had on it. So, in my opinion, I think that this was just an easy explanation. It was easy, it was fast, and I think that they just wanted to close the case.
It.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most easiest thing that you can really say. And people that would believe, because at the time you don't believe that sort of thing. Anything other than hypothermia, because they're in the cold, that sort of thing.
Right. And I mean, it is possible that a few of them did die from hypothermia, but I do not believe that all of them died from hypothermia. Let's just put it that way.
Oh no, I think something happened for them to succumb to that. But when you say radiation, how many people, if it said?
2 people.
Had 2 people.
Yeah.
And what were the types of clothing?
It was 2 sweaters and a pair of trousers.
And that was from someone?
Yeah.
Okay. So did that person have it, or did they get it from another person? the clothing? Like did they borrow it from, not borrow, well, take it from another body, or were they originally wearing it?
That is the question, but I'm not sure, but I can tell you who the people were.
Okay.
So the first person that had the radiation on them was Lyuda, and then the other person that had it was Alexander Kolefatov.
Or Sasha?
Yes.
And they were the ones by the ravine?
Yeah, both of them were found in the ravine.
Okay.
They were part of the group that was found 2 months later.
And when they do like tests on the body, did they all kind of die at the same time, or could they tell when the bodies had died?
They think that the 2 Yuris died first. And the reason being is because clothes were taken off of Doroshenko.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other Yuri, Gravana was laid down right next to Yuri Doroshenko. So they think that those 2 died of hypothermia first, and then their friends dragged them and placed them together under the cedar tree.
Oh, okay, I see.
That's the theory. And then they took clothes off of them to stay warm. So that's really all the evidence they have, if that's even what happened, that those 2 died first and then the other group died later.
Yeah, because, like, saying if, not to cut in, but
No, you're fine.
saying if the clothes were taken, that's one thing. But then what I was thinking was, like, the 2, I forget that, Igor and Yuri, that they were probably telling the other group, here, have these clothes, we can run back and get our other ones from camp. Maybe that was happening?
Yeah, possibly.
I mean, that's the theory I had earlier, where maybe.
So the next theory that has been talked about is the Manzi tribe attacked and killed the hikers. So here are the pros to this theory. First of all, there was a Manzi tent close to where the hikers pitched their tent. And according to 𝑷yatlovPass.com, quote, a trail leading to the 𝒓𝒐, which is a tent, was passing 200 feet from where Dyatlov group camped. So they did have an opportunity, end quote. Also, there is this quote taken from the group diary on January 30th, 1959. Quote, after breakfast, we walk along the 𝒆𝒑𝒕𝒆𝒚 River, but the ice again doesn't allow us to move forward. We went on the bank on a sledge deer trail. In the middle of the road, we saw Manzi shed. Yes, Manzi, Manzi, Manzi. This word comes up more and more often in our conversations. Manzi are people of the north. Small Khanty Manzi nation located in Salahard with 8,000 population. Very interesting and unique people that inhabit the North Polar Urals, close to the Tyumen region. They have a written language and leave characteristic signs on forest trees, end quote. The Manzi people also knew the area well, and according to sources, they did have the skills to hide their ski tracks in the snow. The Manzi people are proud people and consider those mountains their hunting grounds. Okay, now the cons to this theory. First of all, there had not been a crime committed in that area in 3 decades. So, why now? That just didn't make sense to me. And also, I've read that the Manzi people are peaceful people as well.
Yeah, that's what I came across too.
Yeah. And also, according to a Manzi native that was interviewed, she said, quote, everyone goes to this mountain. Russian men and women, Manzi, there is no special prohibition to hike the mountain, end quote. So that came up because some people were thinking that the Manzi were like territorial of that area. And that native was basically saying no.
Yeah, and then where they camped out, that piece of land or that whole area, really, there was no animals. There's nothing there to hunt. And that's another reason why they did call it Dead Mountain, because there's nothing there.
Yes.
And that's why, too, like, when people suggest, oh, maybe it was a bear that got, what was it, like, what's her name's tongue? And eyes and everything, there's like, no, because there's nothing out there.
Yeah, it's literally a dead area. I mean, nothing. And the last con to this story is that none of the hikers' belongings were taken. So they had boots, clothes, food, money, alcohol, etc., and it wasn't touched. Some of the items were very needed and also rare for the Mansi people to have. I read somewhere that the Mansi children, some of them hadn't even seen clothes like that or boots like that, money. However, the items remained untouched for 3 weeks. So if they were killed by the Mansi people, why wouldn't they take all that stuff?
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from. But
yeah, me too.
I don't believe that they would have tried anything.
So the next theory, and just stay with me here because it's a little bit out there, is aliens/UFO. It was reported that on the night of February 1st, which was the night that they died, some bright and pulsating orbits were seen by several geologists that were 70 kilometers away from where the campers were, from Death Mountain. Some people believe that these lights are what scared the hikers and made them rush out of their tent. Interestingly, a man named Lee Ivanov, who was part of the hikers' investigation, states that he saw the top of the trees burned, but he was forced to take out all the evidence alluding to any UFO or supernatural activity, which I found really interesting.
I think because in addition to the whole UFO thing, but that can easily be traced back to military. And they're probably like, that's too easy.
Mm-hmm. Because when I saw he saw the tops of the trees burned, I didn't think UFO. I thought military.
Yeah. Like this whole thing, I can't help but think military.
Agree. I'm right there with you. One more piece of evidence that gives rise to this theory is a picture that has started circulating. So it's kind of unclear about where the picture came from. Obviously, it was from one of the cameras that the campers had, or that the hikers had, but they aren't clear on whose camera it was. But they think it's a photo from Simeon's camera. But again, they aren't, it's kind of muddied, they aren't positive. The photo is often referred to as number 33, and it shows a black background with what looks like bright, blurry lights to the left side of the frame. So, Mary, you have it up right now, right?
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
It's like a series, of blurry lines. Not lines, it's, it's out of focus, obviously. And, because it's also minimized to a bit. And then, if you're listening to this, if you go to our WordPress.
Oh yeah, go to our website, which is
Mystery Nox podcast.wordpress.com.
There you go.
And you can see, we just have a couple images because we can't put all of them up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up there, and it's, it kind of looks to me like a face. Like if you put a flashlight to your face
mm-hmm.
and take a picture, because you can see eyes, nose, and what would be a mouth or a chin.
Wait, that's what you get off of that?
It's just because it's relatively small on the webpage, as opposed to when it's blown up a little bit more, it just looks like blurry blobs.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at it right now, and so supposedly, let me tell you what they think it is, first of all. They think it's a picture of the lights, of the mysterious lights that the geologists saw that night. So they think that whoever took this picture went out and took a picture of the lights.
Well, it had to be really close then.
Mm-hmm.
Because in looking at all these pictures that they took, they didn't have much of a zoom on their camera.
No, absolutely not. But saying it was the lights, or it was whatever they saw that night, that means they were really close to whatever that thing was.
Which would explain radiation and injuries.
The injuries. Yeah, the radiation and the injuries, which is...
Or this thing, whatever it was massive. Either it was massive or they were close to it.
Yeah, that too. But it's up there on our website if you guys want to go take a look. Also, pictures of the hikers are up there as well. So go take a look and let us know.
I also thought too, what if it's a fire? And you know how when it kind of pops and a part of it just kind of flies off? Maybe that's what's in the center.
Oh yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah, because there's no one that really up close.
Mm-hmm. Well, they didn't have Zoom, obviously.
No, exactly, but that's what I'm saying. If you're far away, it's obviously going to be a smaller object. If you're close to it, it's going to be blurry and bigger. And he just kind of snapped it out of just, maybe he hit it by accident, but I mean, there's just a difference in depth of field there. So whatever that was right there. Or it was far away and it was huge.
And the theory is that it was in the sky. It was the lights that they saw in the sky. So if it was lights in the sky, it was massive. All right, let's move on to the next theory, which is that of an avalanche. So this theory has been brought up consistently regarding what happened to the hikers. And I think it comes up a lot just because it's easy to say it's a natural occurrence, and I think that's just where people's minds go immediately. Like, oh, they're in the mountains.
Yeah, and it just goes back to hypothermia, too.
Exactly, same thing. However, there is so much evidence working against this theory. I decided to include it anyway, just because it's a very popular theory, but let's go ahead and go over the evidence for this. So the pros for avalanche. 1, it would explain why the hikers left the tent in a hurry. If they did leave in a hurry, that's debatable. And it would also explain some of the injuries. Some, but not all. And that's really it for the pros for the avalanche. So there's really not much. Cons. So first of all, the area that they were camped at was not prone to avalanches. There was also no physical evidence at all of an avalanche having occurred. So there was no damage to the tree line, there was no debris, and also all the locals that are familiar with the terrain were pretty adamant that this just would not happen in this area.
No. There's no reports or anything, right?
No. If there was an avalanche, no footprints would have been found because they would have been swept away. And also, no avalanches have ever been recorded in that area. So not before this happened and not since this happened.
Speaking of footprints, though.
Yeah.
And you've seen the pictures, how I think it's weird how they look.
I do too.
Some of them are pressed into the snow, and some of them are kind of like raised up.
Yeah, and I saw that too, and I don't know. Obviously, we're not experts on footprints. But yeah, I thought it was really weird too. The ones that were raised up, the above the ground, basically. Like, what causes that? How does that even happen?
And I don't think we have that up on the blog, but I will see about getting a picture up there. So by the time this airs, you guys can check it out. But it just looks weird. Like, it's like a mold or something. I don't know how to describe it really, but it doesn't look like imprinted, it's raised.
Yeah.
And if someone could explain that, that'd be great, because I don't know.
Alright, so where are you with the avalanche theory, Mary?
I don't believe it happened, mainly because there's no reports of it. And if there was, there wouldn't be a tent. I mean, there was snow on it, but that could just be the wind blowing stuff around, or maybe it did snow, but there isn't enough to justify an avalanche, so I don't believe that.
I agree. I don't believe avalanche at all. Now, this next theory makes sense to me. So I do believe that this next theory could be possible. Okay, so this theory is, they call it katabatic wind, or katabatic wind. So according to a passage from museumcenter.org, quote, katabatic means descending wind. So it is also called gravity wind. It is a phenomenon that occurs over ice sheets or cooled mountain areas, including the topography of the Dyatlov Pass area. This hurricane-force wind can reach up to 81 meters a second and happens suddenly without warning like a storm. This phenomenon often occurs at night. One such wind killed skiers in Sweden in 1978 when a wind erupted out of a calm day at 20 meters a second. They abandoned their camp, most died of exposure, and their bodies were found with minor injuries. The bodies were found at intervals that led away from a hastily constructed snow shelter. The difference here is that one person survived." End quote. So as I said, I can actually see this happening because at least it would explain why they left their tent. And then I feel like if that started, they would leave their tent, and then eventually they got separated from each other, and they weren't able to dress properly because they left in a hurry. It doesn't explain everything, and that's what makes me frustrated, and probably everybody else that hears about this case, is that none of the theories explain everything. But it does explain some stuff.
See, now, I didn't know about that part, which is good because we're all learning here. How it had happened before, to another camp. I didn't know that happened. And I could, in terms of hearing it and now, like, piecing it together, it's like, yeah, okay, I can see a little bit of that. But the injuries they sustained doesn't add up to this theory. Like, maybe it's partial? I don't know, but...
That's what I was thinking. So I was thinking, okay, at least in this theory, this is possibly what made them leave their tent without their shoes, without dressing properly. They exited the tent. They started walking in a line, because it does say that the footprints started off kind of in like a straight line. So like they were following each other down the hill. But then they all scattered, like they all started going separate ways. And then, that would explain the theory if the 2 Yuris did die of hypothermia before everybody else. They got separated from the group, and they ended up dying. And then some of the other hikers, once the storm was over, because it can come on really quickly and then come over and, stop really quickly. So once the storm was over, maybe they found their bodies, placed them under the tree, put on some of their clothes to keep warm, build a shelter. But that's all it explains. That's all. It doesn't explain the injuries.
Like, building that takes time, though. Yeah.
It does. But yeah, it still doesn't explain the injuries. It doesn't explain the burns. It doesn't explain the radiation. And this too. I also ran across this when I was researching. Some of the bodies still had their hats on when they were found. So one person said, if this is what happened, wouldn't their snow hats have, like, blown off of them? Now, the last theory that I have on here is, I think, the one that you and I both think happened.
Yes.
Or it's the most plausible to us, at least. And that's the government weapons testing going on. So, quote, the celestial phenomena that accompanied the incident almost convinced everybody that the skiers' lives had been sacrificed to the new Soviet idol, the rocket, end quote. The theory of secret launches of rockets in this area being a secret government test site really explains most of what happened here to me. There was a radiogram that was sent to the headquarters of the search party that stated, quote, the main mystery of the tragedy remains the exit of the entire group out of the tent. The reason could be any extraordinary natural phenomenon, such as the flight of a meteorological rocket, observed, this is important, observed on the 1st of February in Ivdel, and by Carolyn's group. Tomorrow we will continue the search, end quote. If you guys missed that, that was a radiogram, I guess a radio message that was sent to the search party. And they are basically saying the main mystery to them is why the group left the tent. And whoever sent this message is saying the reason could be because of a rocket that was observed on the 1st of February in Ivdel. However, it says here, however, when the researchers reached out to the different launch sites to verify this, they all denied that a launch had been done.
Of course they would.
Jeez.
Of course they would.
And in regards to the secret government test site, the locals still talk about legends, so quote, of meetings with military patrols in the middle of the taiga, holes in the hillsides sealed with concrete, and the sound of a train that comes from under the ground in the woods, end quote. This theory would also explain why radiation was found on some of the clothes and would explain the internal injuries of the 3 hikers. So as stated earlier by that forensic expert, one of the only things that can cause those types of injuries is a shockwave from a bomb. This would also explain why they left the tent without taking time to dress properly, and it would explain the lights that were seen in the sky. So what do you think, Mary?
I definitely think it's military related. There's the lights, obviously. In terms of the war going on, that's where my mind goes. But yeah, just in terms of what was going on at the time, a rocket, I do believe. Saying that that area was known as Dead Mountain, maybe they took advantage of that, knowing that nothing will be there. However, this time, unfortunately, there was a group of students there.
I agree. I mean, this theory explains pretty much everything to me. It explains the injuries. It explains the lights that we're seeing. It explains the radiation. It explains why they left their tent.
Because you said, I mean, there was like 2 of them outside the tent, probably using the bathroom. And so they probably seen this, alerted the group, said, come check this out. I guess they couldn't get to the zipper fast enough that they just cut through. But I was reading some of the journal entries and they were always sewing it together.
I saw that too. Like they would take turns sewing it.
Yeah, so maybe cutting it was no big deal. That's just something they could do later.
Could be, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to me, it would also explain the weird color of their skin and their hair.
Oh, and like when they were doing I read this on one of the forums, and they said at what point, when they were doing the autopsies and whatnot, at what point would they suggest, yeah, let's do a radiation check? Like, what brings you to that point? But I'm pretty sure someone had known a little bit of what went on, but they were trying not to give it away, but they were just like, hey, let's just run this test, just to see how close they were. And then it'd be like, ah, crap, we have to do something about this, because they closed it for, 3 years, that pass? And the military was all over that.
Yeah. So after this incident happened, after the death of the hikers, that pass, like you said, was closed for 3 years to the public. So nobody could go there. Now, why would they do that? Unless there was radiation present.
To clean up.
So yeah, I think it explains it all. The thing that I wonder about is, did they know that the campers were there when they did this experiment? Or was it an accident?
I don't think they did. That's why I think it was an accident. They didn't want to own up to it because there was probably more crap going on that they would have to look into and cover up. So they just said, no, this wasn't that. It was this. It was just a, what was it? Maybe the wind, an avalanche, or hypothermia.
And yeah, and then they also tried to blame it on the Mansi people too. Oh, I actually forgot to mention this when we were talking about the Mansi people, but do you remember when I said that there were no signs of sexual assault in the girls? The reason why they checked that is because they thought that if the campers were attacked, then the girls would have been sexually assaulted. So that is why the coroner checked that aspect of the girls, which there weren't any signs of it. But that's also just another reason to think, like, I don't think that they were attacked by anybody. I just think it was a terrible accident by the government, and I think that they tried to cover it up, and obviously they've gotten away with it if they did.
Yeah, they covered up. I'm pretty sure. Because, 3 years? They had enough time to do that.
So that's the theory that I'm going with. Now, just to let you guys know, there are like a ton more theories than the ones that we went over. These are just like these are the most popular ones, or the ones that I thought were most likely to have happened. The most plausible, I guess. So you guys feel free to go do your own research and look at all the many multitude of theories out there. But there is a lot. There's a lot of theories.
Some are ridiculous. You don't even have to go into the details. You just see like the suggested of what could be, and you're like, no, next.
Now, one more thing that might give more, I guess, credence to what we think happened, Mary. The Russian Prosecutor General's office did reopen this case in 2019. So at first when I heard that, I was like, oh, well, maybe it wasn't military. But they opened the case, but they were only willing to explore 3 possibilities of the hiker's death. And they were all related to weather. A spokesperson for the prosecutor general stated, quote, "Crime is out of the question. There is not a single proof. It was either an avalanche, a falling slab of hard-packed snow, or a hurricane," end quote. So they're not even gonna try to look at different possibilities of why they died.
And when you were reading that, I'm just like shaking my head. Typical. It's like you can try and misdirect all you want. It's not gonna work. And the falling slab of hard-packed snow from what?
I'm not sure if the truth will ever be known about the hikers' fate, but I do know the mystery surrounding them will never be forgotten.
Alright, Mystery Nox listeners, that's it for our case today. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we'd love to hear your ideas and or theories on this case, so let us know on our Instagram and Facebook at Mystery Nox Podcast, on Twitter at Mystery Nox Pod, or send us a voice message on anchor.fm/Mystery Nox Podcast. A list of our sources and the pictures from this case can be found on our blog at mysterynoxpodcast.wordpress.com. Your support is always appreciated, so if you enjoyed what you've heard, please let us know by giving us a review on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll see you on our next episode, and remember, stay weird, stay curious.
Mischief managed.